Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and the Forge is an area for me to talk about magic, Commander, and anything else while I try and drag this whole mental health thing back out of the gutter. Now, today I want to touch on some Universes Beyond stuff because for the first time in a long time, there's two Universes Beyond projects that I'm actually excited for in one year. The first of those is the Final Fantasy set that's coming out in June. And the other one is the Avatar The Last Airbender set, which, if I'm not mistaken, is slated for November. So, let me just start by saying the first Final Fantasy game I played was Final Fantasy X, and this was, man, I don't even remember, back in 2001 maybe? And I fell in love with that game. Like, I've played the remastered version of that game so many times. From there, I played, Final Fantasy 12 is like my second favorite of the Final Fantasy games. I've played 13, 15, and I've gone back and played the retro games, 7, 8, 9. I've played the 7 remake. I've always enjoyed fantasy games, books, you name it. I've always enjoyed that. And my love of Final Fantasy does tend to stick with like the 10 to like 15 range. Don't get me wrong, I did enjoy playing the older games, but when you get to like the older games, like on the DS and stuff, they can drag a lot. Not that they're not enjoyable, they're just very repetitive. But regardless, I am excited to see what they can do with that whole intellectual property, considering what they were able to do with Lord of the Rings, which, as of now, is still in my top 3 sets of all time. So I'm hoping Final Fantasy can crack into that top 5 too. And from the couple of cards I've seen so far, I think they're going to give it a good shot. Now, my love of Avatar The Last Airbender is a little different. So, when I was in high school, I was very stressed, just trying to survive, But one of the things that really just helped lighten the mood would be, coming home and just watching an episode of Avatar The Last Airbender, because there's that comedy element to it. As much as it's got very mature themes throughout the show, a lot of it is banking on comedy as well. And I greatly appreciated that in my very stressed out high school days. That was before I learned how to just not obsess over everything and just obsess over some things. So, that said, I want to talk about some of the things I'm excited to see in both of those sets. And I'm going to start with Final Fantasy. The number one thing I want to see is which Cids make the cut. Because in every game there is a Cid. But I wouldn't put it past them to make every Cid. And by that I don't mean like a different card for every Cid, but the same card for Cid, but with, 30 different arts. Next up, I want to see what they do with the Mughals. I want to see how many different races they can include from every game, because yes, while the predominant race is human in most of them, there are, the races of Spira, which are Ronto, Guado, human, and the Elbed, which is still human but different. So I want to see where they can incorporate, those things. One of the things I'm expecting to see is like 5 or 6 different versions of Sephiroth and Cloud, because let's face it, to this day, they are the 2 most recognizable characters from Final Fantasy. And I just kind of want to end this on one note. The protagonist from Final Fantasy X. I know his name is Tidus, but I will never call him that. His name is and has always been Titus to me. But that's it for the Final Fantasy bit, because I don't want to spend all day on it. So let's shift into Avatar: The Last Airbender. Clearly, we're going to get some form of, Team Avatar and Team Korra. Like, those are kind of givens. Whether, one might be commanders and one might be, like, multiple iterations, considering we do have young Team Avatar and old Team Avatar, and we get flashes of, like, middle-aged Team Avatar. So, yeah, I think that'd be interesting. I think what I really want to see is I want to see 3 different versions of Toph, because we have Toph as, small badass that teaches Aang how to earthbend. Then in the Korra series, we see her as the crazy old hermit. But in flashbacks we have from talking to her children, you see her as, like, the leader of the police in Republic City. So I want to see 3 different versions of Toph Beifong. If the boomerang and Sokka's swords don't end up as equipment, I think I'll be disappointed. Because they are very important to Sokka's story from the beginning to the end of Avatar. Other things I'd like to see, the flying staff, Appa and Momo. If the Cabbage Man is not represented, I think we will revolt. Yeah. And then I'm interested to see how they're going to incorporate the bending into the game. If it'll be like abilities on creatures, like an airbending technique could be tapping down a creature, right? An earthbending technique could be, throwing a rock at something or giving something unblockable because, dug underground. So I'm really interested to see how they're going to do that. And, well, the whole spirit side of things, I think, is going to be its own thing, because of how the spirit world interacts with the Avatar world. So I'm guessing there will be some kind of spirit sub-theme, or maybe a commander deck. And I'm just looking at some of the bigger spirits in The one that keeps coming to mind is the faceless one. And I'm sure that's going to be some kind of horror spirit. And then I think the other thing that I'm really looking to see is Uncle Iroh. But I would love to see him as a flip card. And there's a couple reasons for that. In addition to him, being the Flame of the West and then, joining the White Lotus. So you have that could be a flip card where he starts out as, Fire Nation, then flips to White Lotus. But also you could do the flip between old Uncle Iroh and Spirit Uncle Iroh, which we see, old Iroh in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then we see Spirit version Uncle Iroh in Korra. So that's something I would like to see. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for very base level before we know literally nothing about it. What I'm kind of looking forward to with those sets. That said, I'm going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, I'm going to talk about a thing. I mean, we all know it's a deck, but I'm going to talk about a thing. I'll be right back. And we are back. Now, several weeks ago, I mentioned talking about brewing a Gates deck, which I have not done in a while. And I put it together, and it's kind of a menace. So, to recap, the last time I mentioned it, I had played against somebody playing a Gates deck with Child of Alara. And Child of Alara was just there to come in, wipe the board, and let them continue to play lands. I went with a slightly different approach. So my commander is Jared Carthelian. It is Wooburg for a Planeswalker. For +1, you make a 3/3 Kavu creature token with trample that's all colors. For -3, choose up to 2 target creatures. For each of them, put a number of +1/+1 counters on them equal to the number of colors that it has. And -6, return target multicolored card from your graveyard to your hand. If that card was all colors, draw a card and create 2 treasure tokens. None of that is terribly important because the number of times I've played him is, I think, 2 out of the 15 times that I've played this deck. But let's start with the star of the show. This is a Maze's End deck. So Maze's End is a land, it enters tapped, you can tap it to add a colorless, or you can pay 3, tap it to return Maze's End to its owner's hand, search your library for a gate card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. If you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. So to start off, there are the original 10 guild gates. Now, guild gates all enter the battlefield tapped, and then tap for the respective color of their guilds. So we have Dimir, which taps for blue-black, Izzet, which taps for red-blue, Golgari, which taps for green-black, Orzhov, which taps for white-black, Boros, which taps for red-white, Selesnya, which taps for green-white, Azorius, which taps for white-blue, Rakdos, which taps for black and red, Simic, which taps for green and blue, and finally Gruul, that taps for red and green. There is another gate from Ravnica, which is the Gateway Plaza. It still enters tapped. You have to pay 1 or sacrifice it, but that can make any color of mana. But what really pushed me to build this deck was actually Baldur's Gate, because it introduced more gates. And the few random ones that we've gotten through Magic's history. I'm still missing one. I think it's the Talon Gate. Anyway, let's go with the oddball ones first. First up, we have the Black Gate, which is from Lord of the Rings. It's a legendary land gate. When it enters the battlefield, you can pay 3 life if you don't. It enters tapped. It taps for a black. You can pay 1 and a black, tap it to choose a player with the most life or tied for the most life. That target creature can't be blocked by creatures that player controls this turn. And this deck is just another gate. Same with this next one, which is Thran Portal. It's a land. It's a gate. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer lands, so you can play this early as an untapped land. When it enters, you choose a basic land type. It is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and the mana abilities of Thran Portal cost a life to activate, which means it can enter, choose a color, and you can pay 1 life to add a color to your mana pool. But yeah, finally, we're getting into the Baldur's Gate stuff. The first one we'll talk about is Baldur's Gate, the card. Legendary land, gate, taps for a colorless, or you can pay 2 and tap it to add X mana of any one color where X is the number of other gates you control. Spoiler alert for when we get into the cards in the deck, that is generally going to be green. Then there is a series of gates that all tap for a color, but when they enter, can choose another color so they can tap for 2. So Citadel Gate, they also all enter tapped. Taps for white or the chosen mana. Black Dragon Gate taps for black and the chosen mana. Sea Gate taps for blue and the chosen mana. Manor Gate taps for green and the chosen mana. And Cliff Gate taps for red and the chosen mana. And then we have the 3 other gates in Baldur's Gate. First up, we have Basilisk Gate. Again, normal gate, taps for colorless. You can pay 2 and tap. Target creature gets +X/+X till end of turn, where X is the number of gates you control. Activate only as a sorcery. So if the game's going long and we need to find a way to win, this is one of the few ways we can do that. Next up, we have Heap Gate, which is, again, gate, taps for colorless. You can filter by paying 1 and tapping this to make 1 mana of any color. You can also pay 1 and tap this and an untapped gate you control to make a treasure token. I don't think I've ever done that second ability. It's really just there to be another gate. And finally, we have the Gond Gate, which is, again, a gate. This one is arguably the first or second land I'll try to seek out, because an early Maze's End doesn't necessarily help, but Gond Gate is a gate that does not enter tapped, and it says gates you control enter the battlefield untapped. Taps for a colorless. You can also tap it for 1 mana of any color that a gate you control could produce. So it's arguably definitely in our top 3 most important lands, and I'm arguing that it's only second because this deck wins with Maze's End. Yeah, so that's not enough lands to fuel the whole deck, so there is a selection of other lands. The only basic land type represented is forests. I do have 7 of those. But then the other stuff is just things that are going to help in different ways. So Yavimaya makes everything a forest in addition to its other types, which, again, deck's main color is green. Deserted Temple is in there. It taps for a colorless. You can pay 1 and tap this to untap target land. This is really just in here to untap something like Baldur's Gate if I need to pump a bunch of mana into something. We have the World Tree. This enters tap, adds a green. As long as you control 6 or more lands, lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. And then the bottom ability, which is 2 of every Wooburg, tap and sacrifice it. You can get gods and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. There is 0 gods in this deck. And then we get, obviously, a command tower. Then we get to what I call my protection lands. First up, we have Beseiju, who endures. Legendary land taps for green. You can channel it for 1 and a green to discard it. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search the library for a land card with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So that's, a spell on a land, which is not actually a spell, so it's hard to interact with. Next up, we have our 2 shutdown lands. The first one is Strip Mine. Taps for colorless. You can sacrifice Strip Mine to destroy target land, and then we have its slightly not as good baby brother, which is Wasteland. Taps for colorless, sacrifice Wasteland, destroy target non-basic land. And that's the base of my deck, because at its core is a land deck. And while I don't want to go through all of the cards because I don't want to take forever, I do have a good selection of cards that I'm going to pull several from. And we're going to start with the things that let you play extra lands. So up first we have Exploration. Single green, enchantment, you can play an additional land on each of your turns. We have Growth Spiral, which is green and a blue for an instant. Draw a card, you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. We have Eureka Moment, which is 2, a green and a blue for an instant. Draw 2 cards. You can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. We have Gretchen Twitchwillow, which is a green and a blue for a 0/4 halfling druid. You can pay 2, a green and a blue to draw a card, and then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. We have Azusa, Lost But Seeking. 2 and a green for a 1/2 human monk. You can play 2 additional lands on each of your turns. Zimone, Quandrix Prodigy. A green and a blue for a 1/2 human wizard. You can pay 1 and tap her to put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. You can pay 4 and tap her to draw a card. If you control 8 or more lands, draw 2 cards instead. We have Bonnie Paul, the Clear Cutter. 3 green, blue for a 6/5 giant scout with reach. When she enters the battlefield, create Bow, a legendary blue ox creature token with this creature's power toughness are each equal to the number of lands you control. And whenever you attack, draw a card, then you may put a land card from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield. Next up, we have Mina and Den Wildborn, 2, a red and a green for a 4/4 elf ally. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. You can also pay a red and a green to return a land you control to its owner's hand. Target creature gains trample till end of turn. Next up, we have Wayward Swordtooth, 2 and a green for a 5/5 dinosaur with Ascend. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, and it can't attack or block unless you have the city's blessing. And finally, in this section, we have Dryad of the Elysian Grove, 2 and a green for a 2/4 Nymph Dryad. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. Lands you control are every basic land type in addition to their other types. So, the most important thing is putting lands into play. And sometimes chaining them out of the graveyard. But let's talk about the best ways we have to get some specific lands out. So the real game ender in this deck is Reshape the Earth. It's 6 green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 10 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. If nobody can answer the 10 lands you put into play, there's a good chance Maze's End is in there, and you just happened to put 9 gates into play. So even if you, by some miracle, didn't have any gates, you still have enough to untap and win. If perchance you have a thing in play that lets your lands come into play untapped, then you just can win then. But next up we have Crop Rotation. Single green for an instant. There's an additional cost to cast the spell, sack a land, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And the big one is Scapeshift. 2 green for a sorcery. Sacrifice any number of lands, search your library for up to that many land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. Alright, now next up we have our graveyard recursion stuff for lands, because let's face it, people are going to want to get rid of our lands. So first up we have Conduit of Worlds. 2 green for an artifact. You can play lands from your graveyard. You can also tap it to choose target non-land permanent card in your graveyard. If you haven't cast a spell this turn, you may cast that card. If you do, you can't cast additional spells this turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So that one pulls double duty if something else gets put into our graveyard that we need to get back out. Next up we have the Perennial Behemoth. 5 mana for a 2/7 beast. You may play lands from your graveyard. It also has Unearth for green. So if we need a one-shot, hey, I need to get that wasteland out to deal with a thing, then we can just do that. Next up we have Ramanap Excavator. 2 and a green for a 2/3 Naga Cleric. You may play land cards from your graveyard, which mirrors, Crucible of World, which is 3 mana for an artifact. You may play land cards from your graveyard. Then we have the Ancient Green Warden, which is 4 green for a 5/7 elemental with reach. You may play land cards from your graveyard. And if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Next up we have Airness Gloomstalker, which is 2 and a green for a 3/3 Halfling Ranger with Death Touch. When they attack, return target card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Has choose a background. That is not important here. Next is the card that helped inspire this whole deck, which is just Life from the Loam. It's still one of my favorite cards of all time. 1 and a green for a sorcery. Return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand, and it has Dredge 3. And finally, the Pièce de Resistance that goes with Scapeshift is Splendid Reclamation. 3 and a green for a sorcery. Return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Right, we're running a little long here, so I'm going to kind of speed run the last few cards. First up, we have Spelunking. 2 and a green for an enchantment. Enters the battlefield, draw a card. Then you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put a cave into play, you gain 4 life. I don't have a cave in this deck. More importantly, lands you control enter the battlefield tapped, or untapped. Amulet of Vigor, single mana for an artifact. Whenever a permanent enters the battlefield tapped under your control, untap it. The number of cards I have that just say search for a land and not a basic land. So, Sylvan Scrying, sorcery, search your library for a land card, reveal it, goes to your hand, shuffle. Open the Way is one that I've been very happy with. X green, X can't be greater than the number of players in the game. Reveal the top card of your library till you reveal X land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom in a random order. Kura, the Boundless Sky, is 3 green for a 4/4 Dragon Spirit with Flying and Death Touch. When it dies, you can either search your library for up to 3 land cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle, or create an XX green spirit creature token where X is the number of lands you control. And finally, we have Jadzi, Oracle of Avros, which is 6 blue for a 5/5 human wizard. You can discard a card to return it to its owner's hand, but it has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you can cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. If it's a land card, you put it onto the battlefield. But the backside of that is Journey to the Oracle. 2 green for a sorcery. Put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Then, if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card. If you do, return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. Okay, I'm almost done. Finally, I understand that this deck wants to win with Maze's End, but sometimes that just isn't in the cards. So, to that end, we have Scoot Swarm in the deck. 2 and a green for a 1/1 insect with landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you make a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. Just to end games. And finally, we have the Necrobloom, which is 1 white, black, green for a 2/7 plant. It has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token. If you control 7 or more lands with different names, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead. Land cards in your graveyard have Dredge 2. Yeah. So that's it. That's the deck. It's actually a lot of fun to play. And I've gone on for half an hour, so I think I'm going to call it there and say bye-bye. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. All of my links can be found in my link tree in the description below. I would like to thank Ian Foss and Cody Mulpey of the band The Crypt for allowing me to use music for my opening and ending, along with Nate and Erica Jacobs for making my original logo. And I would also like to thank Christina McNichol for creating my new logo. And I'll see you next time.